For this training session, we will be talking about fighting fires in hoarder homes. Before we start, let's talk about the evolution of our written fireground SOPs, one of the greatest places to learn in the firehouse. While this famous picture in our department's history does not represent a hoarder home, I love using this sequence to address something about fireground tactics. How did fires like this be efficiently extinguished back then, at a time when we did not have anything in writing about fireground SOPs? How did Lieutenant Pritchard know that this entire living room was about to light up? How did they know which line to pull? How did they know where and how to search? The answer is simple. You cannot put a price tag on real fireground experience and also on how experience was passed on to other members. A lot of times, experience from a fire like this was passed on to members who were not even there. So where did the pass down of knowledge occur? Where were the unwritten fireground SOPs spoken about? The answer is right here at the kitchen table. This is where the men and women of Fort Lauderdale Fire Rescue have shared stories and learned since the inception of the firehouse, regardless of what has been in writing. The kitchen table is always open, like in this picture, where crews are discussing what went well and what didn't go so well after a fire. It's 3 a.m. here. Members have showered, reheated dinner, and are ready to talk about the job. Don't ever forget the value of performing self-critiques. You and your crew will truly benefit from it. Here are some objectives that we will discuss about hoarder homes. The first is, can we look at a house from the outside and have a suspicion that we may be dealing with hoarders? Is the exterior landscape something we can really depend on? We will also talk about what people are hoarding, and remembering that the act of hoarding truly is a disease. One major point about hoarder home fires is that our typical plan A can basically be thrown out as soon as we realize we are dealing with a hoarder fire, and we will discuss other possible plans. When it comes to our senses, everything changes when dealing with hoarder homes. Our sense of time, distance, direction, and sound are all affected. We will also discuss specific hazards while operating inside of hoarder homes, mainly envelopment, entrapment, and entanglement. Lastly, we will talk about what can be referred to as organized hoarding and look back at a fire from 2005 in a commercial warehouse in which our members encountered such conditions. This quote from Captain Bill Guston of the Miami-Dade Fire Rescue Department can be applied to so many areas of the fire ground. For hoarder home fires in particular, remember, as soon as we realize what we're dealing with, our normal plan of action must change, and with every change of plans, new or more in-depth information must be obtained before we just randomly change our course of actions. Otherwise, we could be taking a bad situation and making it worse. Can the exterior of a home give us any clues as to what type of conditions we may find on the interior? The answer is yes and no. Think about it. If you were a hoarder, would you want to advertise that to your neighbors? Sometimes the front of a home might not give us any clues, but the back may be a mess, which would be found during a 360. Sometimes there may be no junk visible from anywhere on the outside. In other cases, the front of the house may not even be accessible due to the amount of junk in the front yard. In police work, some would call that a clue, and in that case, we should have a high suspicion that the inside is a mess as well. Some people have said that a telltale sign of hoarders is a blue tarp on the roof. We should never rely on that as an indicator of hoarding conditions. Since operating in South Florida, sometimes blue tarps encompass entire neighborhoods after a storm, and they may be up for some time after. Here is a recent fire in 46 zone in which hoarding conditions were found. So look at the outside of the house from the front. Yes, there are some odd objects out front, but nothing that stands out from any other house on the block. So again, sometimes the front does not announce, "I am a hoarder." At the front door of the house, you could see how thick and how low the smoke came down. The main thing to notice is that line. where if we got down real low, sometimes the need to actually lay on our belly and look underneath the smoke, we would clearly see that the pathway inside the home is narrow and full of debris, and it's maybe this moment when we realize that this is a hoarder home. This picture was taken the following morning during overhaul of a rekindle from the night before. You can see the challenging conditions that were faced by both sets of crews, mainly to the first two units overnight, who did not have any warning as to what they were walking into. On the rekindle, the units knew right from the time of dispatch that they were going to a hoarder home fire, thanks to the pass down of information from the prior shift. Wouldn't that be nice if we knew every time? Here are pictures of the same house, only from the backyard. Again, the front did not advertise they were hoarders, but if you find this during a 360, it could be a pretty reliable sign that we're going to be dealing with hoarders. Take a look at this house in Zone 8 Alpha, which from the outside looks pretty nice, including the thick green grass. We would never think this would be a hoarder home if all we did was rely on exterior conditions. Unless, of course, we've been there for a medical run and remember the address. Or better yet, when we do find this on a medical call, are we letting others know about it? Are we getting information placed in the CAD to give that warning at the time of alarm that it is a known hoarder's home? The important thing should show you is that sometimes we won't know or suspect hoarding conditions until we open the front door. Remember the rekindle mentioned earlier? Wouldn't it be nice to know what to expect on the inside of the home ahead of time when we can't see any of this stuff due to the smoke and heat? Sometimes the outside may just provide a subtle hint, like in this case where there isn't too much junk in the yard, but with several vehicles around, we find the front door blocked by what appears to be a motorcycle under a cover. Hoarding is a disease. It truly is. We have to remember that, because then we can understand a little more about what people are hoarding and why it matters to us. Specifically, why and how it matters to us operationally. Basically, people hoard everything, like the house in Zone 8 with the nice front yard. The house was just littered with everything and anything, from mattresses and food to clothes and furnitures littered with random boxes of junk. Every room was almost filled to the ceiling with debris. Because hoarding is a disease, there may be one thing or a couple of things in particular that someone is hoarding, like animals, toys, papers and boxes, clothes, bicycles, and car or machine parts. It's important for us to realize that when we encounter hoarding conditions of something similar in nature, we should be asking ourselves, are they perishable or non-perishable items? For example, we should be operating a bit differently at fires involving boxes or garbage bags of clothes and papers versus fires involving machine parts or bicycles. Imagine how this room full of papers would react with the water that we're applying inside. Imagine what would happen to the boxes of papers or the bags of clothes when we grab at them. When the hoarded materials are soaking up our water and their physical state is being compromised, it is very difficult to operate inside because we cannot move anything out of our way. The boxes will just fall apart, the bags rip, and when items like this are stored on shelves, the added weight may cause collapse inside. Conditions like this should be thought of as perishable hoarding. Operating safely and efficiently inside may not necessarily involve the removal of the junk, but creating some sort of stable work area by using doors or other solid objects or pieces of furniture, anything that's solid that we can lay on top of the debris. Non-perishable type hoarding conditions would be objects that do not care about how much water we are applying, like bicycles, car or machine parts, shopping carts, lawnmowers, any kind of metal debris. Operating inside of structures with conditions like this may very well involve the removal of everything in our way, like tunneling through, literally handing items one at a time backward and out through the front door along a makeshift assembly line of firefighters. It's also important to communicate what you're handing back when removing debris. In limited visibility, I would put my arms and my hands out differently to accept a bicycle being handed to me than I would if someone were handing me a box. When we say hoarding is a disease and people hoard anything and everything, it's important to remember that one of the last places in a hoarder home to be filled with junk is usually the bathroom, because people will always want to have at least a space to do their business. Until the disease gets so bad and the only place left to hoard things is the bathroom, now there's nowhere to go, and people will start hoarding their own urine and feces in an attempt to maintain some sort of self-dignity and at least think that they're being mindful of keeping things clean. So you've responded to a reported fire, arrive and begin to operate. Nothing too obvious from the outside is indicating a hoarder's home until you force the front door and find this. Then what? What is going to be your plan? This is what we mean when we say that plan A is immediately out. We want to go through the front door, but obviously we cannot. One thing to keep in mind is that getting inside is going to be tough, and that's a given. The most important thing to remember for us is that getting out is what we want to be easy. Proceeding slowly to ensure our exit is rapid is paramount. If we are tunneling through and removing debris, make sure it is very clear from the front door. If we're using solid objects to place over perishable debris and create a work area, make sure that the exit is always clear. Whichever mode of operating is used at a hoarder home fire, it is not your typical plan, and for that reason, when plan A is out from the start, we need to be ready to come up with a plan B, C, and D, anticipating a very dynamic and unusual scene. If the front door is not going to be our point of entry, look for signs as to where the occupants go in and out on a daily basis. You may notice a path carved out in the grass from heavy foot traffic leading to the side or a rear door, or you may open a side gate and see a narrow walkway leading to a door in the rear, as is the case in this home in Zone 8 that had the motorcycle blocking the front door. Again, here's a closer picture of the one from earlier, with the motorcycle blocking the entrance at the front. A 360 would reveal the best way in and out for us. This is the same house, a picture from the inside looking towards the front door. Clearly, that door is not being used by the residents on a daily basis, and if we took the time and effort to move the things blocking the front door and then force it, only to find these conditions, it would be a big waste of resources. Staying disciplined and doing a 360 could possibly save us valuable time and effort. Let's talk about how our senses can get skewed while operating at hoarder fires. The first thing to typically become distorted is our sense of time. It's important to realize that because if you end up running low on air while you're still inside of a hoarder home, you could really end up in a huge jam. Time is easily skewed when we work, and most likely in hoarding conditions, time gets skewed from being frustrated. What may seem like a short amount of time working to you may in reality be a long period because you don't know what you will encounter on your way out. Have you ever... Another thing that easily becomes distorted for us is our sense of direction, both distance and directional ups and downs. How far inside do you think you are? It's a question that we ask at multiple hoarder fire training sessions, and when guys and girls come out and see how far they actually went, they are amazed to see that in a time frame they thought was extended to begin with, they only made very little progress getting in, when in fact they thought that they were 30 or 40 feet inside. Some companies will spend 7 minutes working and be told to rotate crews out, and they are in disbelief that they just spent 7 minutes working when it only feels like a couple. That's also very important for chief officers to remember. When hoarder fires are encountered, requests for extra units should be made immediately. Expect a heavy workload for companies on scene just to get water on the fire and possibly removing debris. Crews will most likely have to be rotated out several times in what may resemble a RIT operation. Along with distance from point A to point B, our sense of direction can be distorted when we start going up on top of the debris, either intentionally or without even realizing it. Think about how surprised you would be making your way through this house, and as you're crawling around, you come across an opening and find it to be a window. It's very easy to find yourself a few feet off the floor in cluttered places and not even realize that you were going up. With that being said, what goes up must come down, right? What happens if we fall down inside of perishable type hoarding and become enveloped in the debris? What if no one can hear you calling for help or no one can hear your pass alarm because of the amount of junk. What do you think theaters do to help with the acoustics? They fill it with stuff, right? Like pads on the wall to absorb the sound. Think about how much sound could be absorbed in a hoarder's home. That's how our sense of sound can also easily become distorted while operating at hoarder fires. Hazards that we face which can be specific to hoarding fires include envelopment, which we just talked about, when you become surrounded by debris that you cannot get out of, possibly due to falling through it. Another hazard which can be prevalent at hoarding fires is becoming entrapped, possibly due to large piles of debris falling down and blocking your exit. It's also very possible to become entangled by the objects inside. Firefighters should regularly practice self-survival skills to ensure that they are ready to handle either of these emergencies. It's important to remember we may face hoarding conditions in structures other than single-family homes. Ever walk into a dollar store and notice the enormous amount of stuff inside, or any other similar business for that matter? Grocery stores, home repair, and auto parts stores are perfect examples of organized hoarding. We may also encounter hoarding conditions in warehouses. We must recognize that and think about how the interior conditions could hamper our search, hose line advancement, and getting water on the fire. It may be beneficial, depending on the circumstances, to knock down shelves ahead of us and operate by climbing over the debris, as opposed to advancing past stacked shelving and waiting for it to collapse on us or our hose line and rendering the operation useless, causing a mayday. Remember, it's not necessarily about getting in quick in hoarding fires, but ensuring that we have a quick exit. Back in 2005, Engine 46 was first due to a fire reported in the Exist Sports Line on Northwest 23rd Avenue, a clothing storage and distribution warehouse. Lieutenant Jake Snow White and his crew did a phenomenal job when they encountered hoarding conditions inside the building. They applied water as necessary and anticipated collapse, which did in fact occur. The shelves of boxes filled with clothes became saturated from the water weight and started coming down. Knowing what we know now about hoarding conditions, we can say this warehouse was full of perishable type debris. The fire went to a second alarm and required crews to operate in rotations, making entry and applying water and utilizing wheelbarrows to remove some of the debris. Chief officers recognized the need to bring in multiple units to accomplish this and also called for a county bus which provided an air-conditioned rehab unit during a very hot July day. Thank you for completing training on hoarder home fires. Remember that this just scratches the surface on what we may encounter out there and have to deal with. Please contact a member of the Training Bureau staff if you have any further questions or comments. And remember, keep training and stay safe out there.